Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we've got another news rumor video here to discuss. In today's video, we're looking at signing from our past couple of days, some injury updates, waiver updates, a couple pieces of news, and I've got some trade rumors involving the Kings, the Bruins, the St. Louis Blues, and a couple of other teams. We'll touch on all of this coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the End-to-End Hockey channel. Now before we get started, don't forget to like this video and subscribe below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do it without all of you guys, so if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below, don't forget to leave a comment. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers, and we're going to try and hit 675 subscribers before the trade deadline, so if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button, really just help out the channel. Also don't forget to stay tuned for videos coming out in the very near future, and on top of that, if you haven't already, check out my Buy Me a Coffee page. I'll leave a link to it down in the description below. If you can, make a donation. It really does help out the channel. And once again, if you guys don't know already, I'm doing a live stream on March 6th at around 11:30 p.m. Mountain Time for the trade deadline. So I'll be with you guys live streaming the trade deadline and seeing what happens on trade deadline day. So if you can, March 6th, 11:30 p.m. Mountain Time, check in on the channel. But in today's video, we've got another news and rumor video here to discuss. So first, we're going to start off by talking about a signing from our past couple of days. Only one signing, but it was a very interesting one, and that was with Mitchell Gibson in Washington. The young prospect goaltender, who's 26 years old, has played in Washington the past couple of seasons, but didn't get a contract with the Caps until right now. He has gotten a 2-year contract with the Washington Capitals with the AAV of $13,000. So he was a prospect with the Caps for the past a while. I don't think he was qualified as an RFA last year, so he basically was just playing with the Caps AHL affiliates, and the Caps have saw fit to sign into a contract. He's done pretty well. He has an above .915 save percentage in 13 ECHL games as well as 12 AHL games. So he's actually been doing pretty good for the Caps AHL affiliates, and now he signs a 2-year contract to stay with the Washington Capitals. So very interesting note there. He'd be a decent third, fourth stringer for the Caps. So interesting note there. But former prospect of the Capitals, Mitchell Gibson, has signed a 2-year contract to now be once again with the Washington Capitals under contract. So very interesting note there. But that was the only signing for our past couple of days. Next, going over to a couple of injury updates. When it comes to some injury updates, only a couple of injury updates here to talk about. First, with the Anaheim Ducks, Leo Carlson and Freddie Fertrano were both full participants in practice as the Ducks got back to practicing, and there's some speculation they could be returning as early as when the Ducks get back in game action after the Olympic break. So that would be great. Fertrano's been out since I think late December, and Carlson's been out since I think mid-January, so to see those two get back would be a big boost to the Ducks forward group. However, Mrazek has underwent hip surgery and is out for the rest of the regular season, so that's an awful blow. Mrazek had been a pretty solid backup for the Anaheim Ducks, so to see him go down with a injury, it's not overly good. Hip injuries are awful, especially for goaltenders, so hopefully he'll be ready to go for next season, but that's a bad blow for the Ducks as they're now going to have to rely on Ville Husso to be their backup. Wyatt Kaiser, it seems like, will still be out with a leg injury after the Olympics. He has progressed a little bit, but it seems like the injury is still nagging a little bit, so even when the Hawks get back in a week and a half to game action, do not expect Wyatt Kaiser to be back for the Chicago Blackhawks. Fiala, who we talked about in our last couple of videos, has a leg injury. Not surprisingly, has been placed on injured reserve by the LA Kings. I think there's a very likely chance he'll be placed in long-term injured reserve if the Kings do some things at the trade deadline, so we'll have to wait and see on that, but not surprisingly, Fiala has been placed on injured reserve. Chris Letang is nearly 100% from his lower body injury that kept him out of the last 4 games, so the Pittsburgh Penguins before the Olympic break, so it sounds like Letang will be ready to go when the Penguins get back into game action, which will be a big boost there for Pittsburgh. Philip Hollander, who has missed the last 3 months due to a blood clot in his leg, is apparently being placed on a conditioning stint to the AHL, so that could mean that he could be nearing a return, which would be a big boost for the Penguins to get Philip Hollander back in the very near future. Well, Sidney Crosby left Wednesday's game for Team Canada with lower body injuries out day to day. He hasn't been ruled out for the tournament. There's a possibility he could play on Friday, but it didn't look overly good, and if this is something super serious, it could also affect the Penguins season, because if Crosby's going to be out for, let's say, a few weeks, maybe a month, that's going to drastically tear down the Pittsburgh Penguins' chances to make the playoffs, especially with the Blue Jackets playing as well as they have. So hopefully it's nothing too serious. Hopefully Crosby can play either in the semifinals or the gold or bronze medal game for the Team Canada, but it's not overly good for the Canadians, who lost their captain in the last game due to an injury. So hopefully Crosby isn't overly injured. And Max Crozier underwent core muscle surgery and will miss the next 10 weeks, which pushes him on a timeline after the regular season, potentially nearing the end of the first first round of the playoffs. So Crozier is going to be out for quite a bit of time for the Tampa Bay Lightning, and most likely his regular season is done. So bad blow there for Tampa Bay on the defensive end. So very interesting note there. But some very interesting injury updates from our past couple of days. Now going into some recalls, reassignments, and waiver updates. Now, because the NHL teams have been able to start to get to practice, and some teams have had some open slots with some players still at the Olympics, we saw a lot of call-ups. Now, I'm not sure how many of these guys will still be with the NHL club when they get back into game action later next week, but here are the guys who were called up. DiPietro in Boston, Grudon in Calgary, Rinzel and Korchinski in Chicago, Watson and Dries in Detroit, Copley in Los Angeles, Kachuk and Kierstead in Minnesota, Berard and Brisson in New York, Chalowski in New Jersey, Bjornsson and Bonk in Philadelphia, Bystedt and Leddy in San Jose, Romanov in St. Louis, Villeneuve in Toronto, Boot, McCartney, Simishev, Lamoureux, Villalta in Utah, and Dewar, Heinola, Salomonson, DiVincentis, and Winnipeg were all recalled by their NHL clubs. So very interesting note there, but that is a lot of recalls from our past couple of days. We might see a couple more over the next few days. I'm not sure how many of these will stay at the NHL level, but very interesting note there. When it comes to some players who are reassigned, Ian Moore in Anaheim and Matt Savoie and Edmonton are both reassigned to their AHL clubs. So it seems like both of those teams want to get their younger players some AHL playing time. So we shall see how this works for both sides. Moore's been a pretty decent third pair defenseman, and Savoie a decent middle six forward for the Ducks and the Oilers respectively. So very interesting note there, but those two guys are going to be with the AHL club for the current point. So very interesting note there. When it comes over to some waiver updates, we talked about this in our last video about how Jeff Skinner was placed on waivers, unconditional waivers, by the sounds of the Sharks for the purpose of a contract termination. I said there's a very likely chance he would probably wind up clearing, and that was the case. Skinner has wound up clearing unconditional waivers, so not too surprising there. He is now a UFA, so his time in San Jose has come to an end, and we shall see if he signs a contract before the trade deadline. But very interesting note there, Jeff Skinner is now a UFA and could be signed by any NHL team, so we should wait and see on that. Well, two players were placed on waivers yesterday by the Caps and the Avalanche. I don't know the exact outcome at this point in time, but Mitchell Gibson in Washington as well as Jacob McDonald in Colorado were both placed on waivers. I think McDonald was on injury reserve or something like that, so I don't think he's going to get claimed. I think it's more unlikely that he winds up clearing. Like we just talked about a few minutes ago, Gibson was just signed by the Washington Capitals, so because they signed him, they need to place him on waivers before he can be sent back down to the AHL. So very interesting note there. I expect both of these guys to probably clear. I don't think there's any team out there who would really try to acquire a depth defenseman who's coming up from injury reserve or a goaltender who just signed a contract. So very interesting note there, but keep your eye on that. I would think both those guys will end up clearing. So very interesting note there, but Skinner is clearing conditional waivers, while McDonald and Gibson were both placed on waivers. So very interesting note there. And lastly here, going over to a couple of news updates. Just some small news updates here. Pierre-Edouard Bellemare, who's been out of the NHL the past 2 seasons, was currently playing for France at the Olympics, has officially decided to call it quits, including with international play. So it sounds like Pierre-Edouard Bellemare is officially hitting up the skates after he had 138 points in 700 NHL games. He had a really solid career, played with teams like Seattle, Colorado, Tampa Bay. I'm pretty sure there was a couple of other teams, I think Philadelphia as well. So very interesting note there, but Bellemare had a long and very interesting career. Hasn't been in the NHL the past couple of seasons, and now it seems like he's officially retiring. So very interesting note there. When it comes to the Edmonton Oilers, Paul Coffey is rejoining the Edmonton Oilers as an assistant, sort of a defensive-minded guy. He's been helping the Oilers as an assistant the past couple of years. This year it sort of took him a step back. That Oilers defense has been pretty bad, so he's back as an assistant. We shall see if that makes a difference to the Oilers defensive play. So very interesting note there, but Paul Coffey is back with the Edmonton Oilers as an assistant. So very interesting note there. Those are all the other big pieces of news. And lastly, we're going over to a couple of trade rumors. So lastly here, going over to a couple of trade rumors. We got 4 trade rumors here to talk about. So first, Rick Dahliwahl is talking about the Vancouver Canucks, as he is one of the reporters for the Canucks, and he mentions a couple of teams that could have some interest in Evander Kane. Now, I'm not sure if these are actually teams who have checked in or if these are just Dahliwahl speculating, but he has said the Colorado, Tampa, and Los Angeles could all have some major interest in Evander Kane. Makes some sense. The Avalanche have been linked to Kane before. I definitely think they could be looking to try and add some more physicality to their bottom 6, so that would make some sense. There's been some talk about Tampa trying to add something on the forward group. Not sure if Kane would be the best fit, but it could add some toughness in what would be a really hard to play against Eastern Conference. And the LA Kings have also been mentioned a little bit. There's been some more recent rumblings about that after the Kevin Fiala injury. So very interesting note there. It seems like the Canucks are open to retaining half of his contract, which would put his cap at, I think, just over $2.6 million. But they do want a second or third round pick, it sounds like, for Evander Kane. Now, they gave up a 4th round pick in the offseason to get Kane from the Edmonton Oilers. But we're in the deadline, he's a penny UFA. The Canucks could retain a little bit of money. I could see him get a 3rd round pick. I'm not sure if they'd be able to get a 2nd round pick. It seems like that might be what they're trying to push for right now. But they at least want a 3rd round pick, it seems like, for Evander Kane. So very interesting note there, but keep your eye on Evander Kane, as there's a very likely possibility he could get moved, with teams like Colorado, Tampa, and Los Angeles potentially being landing spots. So we should wait and see on that. Next one over to Jason Gregor. He was talking about the Florida Panthers recently, and he mentions that Evan Rodrigues might be a guy the Florida Panthers look to move at the trade deadline. Now, we've talked about this before in a couple of videos. I talked about, I think, in one of my last videos about how the Panthers could look to move a couple penny UFAs. They don't have a ton of penny UFAs on their roster, but a guy like AJ Greer or Luke Cunnin or someone like that, I think Tomas Nosek as well, who are penny UFAs, might be very interesting trade options there for the Panthers, especially if they are on the outside looking in. They could look to try and be sellers. And Rodrigues is a very interesting case. Now, if the Panthers did want to try and add some pieces, they'd have to move off cap, and Rodrigues makes the most sense. He's signed for, I think, this year, plus either 1 or 2 more seasons. He's making $3 million on the AAV, and he's not doing overly bad, but he's an expendable piece. He's a guy who's mostly plays on like the 2nd or 3rd line. He can put you up some points. He's not a terrible special teams guy either, but he's a guy who they could try and find a cheaper replacement for than a guy who's making $3 million right now, especially with the Panthers being up against the cap like they are right now. And especially if they were to try and free up some cap space, it might make sense that Rodrigues will be the odd man out. Even if they weren't trying to create cap space and they were just trying to sell off some pieces, Rodrigues could bring them a pretty good value. Like, he's a solid middle 6 guy who can play on the center, who can play in the wing, very versatile guy. He's not making too much money for most teams playing like that middle 6 role, and I think a lot of teams would have some interest in Evan Rodrigues if he was available. So once again, we'll have to wait and see on that. No guarantees that he gets moved, but with the Panthers up against the cap, with them looking like they might be sellers, Gregor does think that there's a possibility that Evan Rodrigues could be looked at as a potential trade candidate for the Florida Panthers. And I've said this before, I think Rodrigues could be the easiest candidate the Panthers have to clearing cap, and they could get a pretty good return for him as well if they were to try and move on from him. So very interesting note there, but we'll have to keep our eye on Evan Rodrigues and Florida, because if they do fall off a little bit coming out of the Olympic break right before a trade deadline, we could see Evan Rodrigues move, and I wouldn't be surprised if that happens. Next, going over to the Boston Bruins. Now, we talked about this a couple of weeks back, just before the Rasmus Andersson deal. It seemed that the Boston Bruins really wanted Rasmus Andersson, but the Vegas Golden Knights were able to beat them out, and now Rasmus Andersson is in Vegas. But it seems that the Boston Bruins search for a top 4 defensive upgrade has not stopped. As according to James Murphy, he was talking about the Boston Bruins, and he says that this team has some serious interest right now in Blues defenseman Justin Faulk. So that will be very interesting, them trying to acquire Faulk. It sounds like they really do want a right shot defenseman, but it seems that they might be throwing that in the wind right now and trying to just get a top 4 upgrade. The Bruins are in the 2nd wildcard spot in the Eastern Conference, a couple of points up on teams like Columbus, Ottawa, and Toronto, as well as Washington. So there's no guarantees they will make the playoffs, and given the talent on their roster, I could see them going a tailspin in the second half of the season, but they have been really resilient, and it seems like the Bruins staff really wants to reward them for that. So Faulk makes a little bit of sense, like adding another top 4 defenseman after losing a guy like Brandon Carlo last year makes some sense. He could really fit well in that top 4 with guys like McAvoy and Hampus Lindholm. I think that could be a really good addition there. Now, it seems like the Blues want a Rasmus Andersson style return, so you're probably looking for the Boston Bruins as a possible trade package of like Mason Lohrei, a 1st round pick either this year or next year. You're looking at like a B or C level prospect, and then maybe another asset, like whether it's like a low end roster player, a low end prospect, maybe like a lower draft pick, maybe something like that. That's sort of the package you're looking at if the Bruins were to try and pull off a Justin Faulk deal. So do I think it could happen? Absolutely. I think that the Bruins are an aggressive team. They're in a playoff spot right now, so I think they're going to try and add some pieces to try and fill some holes. I don't think it'd be the best option for the Bruins, but the Bruins were apparently heavily currently in on Andersson, so given the fact Faulk could easily be the next best defenseman on the trade market right now, I don't think it'd be too surprising to see Boston try and swing for the fences and acquire Justin Faulk. So I'll have to wait and see on that, but keep your eye on the Boston Bruins. It seems that they are still in the market for a top 4 defenseman, and it seems like Justin Faulk is at the tippy top of their trade list to try and acquire, so we'll have to keep our eye on that over the next couple of weeks leading up to the trade deadline. And lastly, going over to Ben Kuzma. In a recent article he was talking about the Vancouver Canucks and the Los Angeles Kings, and he says that after the loss of Kevin Fiala for the rest of the regular season, and with Center and Kopitar retiring after this year, could the Los Angeles Kings be big players to trying to acquire Elias Pettersson before the trade deadline? Now, it seems like Pettersson's name is out there. Now, he does have trade protection, so if he doesn't want to move, there will be no Elias Pettersson trade, so that's very interesting to note there. But it does seem like the Kings could be one of the front runners if they were to try and trade Elias Pettersson. I know it's in the division, so I'm not sure how likely that is to happen, but Pettersson is a guy who can be a solid 1 or 2 line center. He's not the 100-point player he was 2 or 3 years ago, but he's still a really solid center, and the Kings have been looking for a center. They traded Philip Deneau a couple of months ago, so they have been looking for a guy. I think they'd be open to just trying to get like a stopgap 3rd-line center to get them through this year. But if they were able to get someone who can really work well with that team going forward, like they have Quinn Byfield, who can be a solid 2nd-line center, but Kopitar's leaving. They don't have a 3rd-line center after the Deneau trade, so they really are a little bit weak down the middle. So if they were to acquire Elias Pettersson to sort of be their new number 1 center after Kopitar retires after this year, it makes a ton of sense. Now, as for what sort of a trade package could look like, once again, if Pettersson doesn't want to do this, there will be no trade. But if Pettersson's open to the idea of going to Los Angeles, like I could see it happen. A trade package would probably have to include like a 1st-round pick, probably have to include maybe Quinton Byfield. I'm not sure if the Kings would be open to moving him. They'd probably have to include a couple of really good prospects, maybe a couple of other top-end draft picks, maybe a roster player or 2. I'm not exactly sure, but it would have to be a pretty big ask, it seems like, to acquire Elias Pettersson out of Vancouver. So we'll have to wait and see on that. Once again, these 2 teams are in division, so it'll be a very hard deal to work out with, but it seems like Elias Pettersson is on the block, and maybe the Kings, who have some major needs at center, could be the team who ends up landing him. So we'll have to wait and see on that. I still think an Elias Pettersson trade, at least in season, is very unlikely, but we'll have to wait and see what the next 2 weeks brings us when it comes to Elias Pettersson. So definitely, I'll let you guys thoughts on all this down in the comment section below. Do you think the LA Kings could acquire Elias Pettersson from the Vancouver Canucks? Do you think the Boston Bruins could acquire Justin Faulk from the St. Louis Blues? Can the Canucks get a 2nd or 3rd-round pick for Evander Kane? And do you think that the Florida Panthers are able to move Evander Rodrigues? Definitely thoughts on all of that, plus all the news updates, signings, recalls, all of that stuff. Definitely thoughts on all of that down in the comment section below. That's all I'm going to talk for today. Remember to like this video. If you really liked it, remember to subscribe below. Thank you for all of your support. I'll never be able to do this for all of you guys, so if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers. If you haven't already, check out my Buy Me a Coffee page. I'll leave a link to it down in the description below. If you can make a donation, it really does help out the channel. And also a blog talking about news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that, so check that out. I'll leave a link to it down in the description below. Can I see you guys all for the next video? See you guys soon.